the final method we want to use to solve a quadratic equation is called completing the square. And to do this process, I'm going to use the same quadratic equation that I used with the quadratic formula in the last video. So that was 2x squared minus 12x minus 38 equals 0. Okay. Now, what I want to do here, first of all, is I want to make sure that a equals 1. So in this case, a equals 2. All I have to do is divide both sides of the equation by 2. And I find that 2x squared divided by 2 gives me x squared. Negative 12x divided by 2 is negative 6x. And negative 38 divided by 2 is minus 19. And 0 divided by 2 is still 0. Now, this helps out in a couple of ways. First of all, it makes me deal with smaller numbers. Second of all, it makes this process of completing this, the square easier. Now, unlike the other formats where we want it to equal 0, at this point I'm going to put c over here on the other side. So I want to add 19 to both sides, and that's going to give me x squared minus 6x equals 19. Okay. Now, at this point, I want to look just at the left-hand side. And I would like to turn this into something that is actually squared. That's why we call it completing the square. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add something onto this side of the equation. And if I add something to this side, I will have to add that same thing to the other side. And all I do is I take half of the b value, which in this case would give me negative 6, and I square that value. Negative 6, I take half of that and I get negative 3. So what I want to add to both sides is negative 3 squared. So since I added on the left, I'm going to add it on the right as well. Negative 3 squared. Of course, negative 3 squared is positive 9. So I add positive 9 to both sides, and I get x squared minus 6x plus 9 equals 28. Now, at this point, I'm basically going to factor just like we did in the first video. A was 1. All we had to do was say what two numbers multiply to make 9 and add up to negative 6. Well, negative 3 times negative 3 is 9, and negative 3 plus negative 3 is negative 6. So this side will factor to x minus 3 times x minus 3. Now this will always happen because of the way we chose this number. What we got was one thing multiplied by itself, and that still equals 28. We haven't done anything except factor this side. But at this point, we know that when we multiply something by itself, that's the same thing as squaring it. This is why it's called completing the square. We have made something that is completely squared. And at this point, we can unsquare both sides, which, just like before, would be take the square root. And that tells me that x minus 3 has to equal the square root of 28. Don't forget, though, that when we do this, we have to take the positive or negative square root of 28. And once we do that, we want to simplify this radical. And so I will come over here to the side and figure out what 28 is. And of course, I know that's 7 times 4 and 2 times 2. So I get a pair of 2's, which come outside with the positive or negative. and I get a 7 that has to stay all by itself inside the radical. And I have x minus 3 equals that. And I want to solve for x, which is pretty simple at this point. I add 3 to both sides. And I find out that x will equal 3 plus the square root of, 2 times the square root of 7, or 3 minus 2 times the square root of 7, which is exactly the same answer I got from the quadratic formula.